Mary Ellen Pleasant was born on the 19th of August 1814, though this is disputed as her gravestone in California states 1817. Her origins are unclear, as it's believed she was born into slavery on a Georgia plantation, yet she would later state that she was born free in Philadelphia to a full-blooded negress from Louisiana, referring to her mother and a Hawaiian father. As a young girl, she was separated from her family, though the details of how this came about are unknown. It's speculated that when she was around 10 to 13 years old, she arrived in Nantucket, Massachusetts, where she worked as a domestic servant for a white family. During this time, she discovered that being invisible to those around her could be very useful. She would later turn this trait into an advantage. While with her family, she was treated well, learning to read, write, and how to work in a shop. Apparently, the family was deeply involved in the Abolitionist movement. This may have ignited her passion for the cause, as she met many famous abolitionists. Pleasant was an intelligent girl who learnt quickly despite not having received any type of formal education. In her 1902 biography, she stated, "I often wonder what I may have been with an education." She then goes on to write that, "I have let books alone and studied men and women a good deal. I have always noticed that when I have something to say, people listen. They never go to sleep on me." Some years after, Pleasant married her first husband, called James Smith. He was a wealthy flour contractor and merchant who was of white or mixed ancestry. Smith was also a staunch abolitionist, and together they worked on the Underground Railroad as slave stealers. The couple helped slaves flee from their slaveholders by hiding them in safe houses, later transporting them to the US northern states or even as far as Canada. Unfortunately, Smith died in the 1840s, leaving Pleasant with a considerable inheritance and instructions to continue the crucial work they had dedicated years to. Pleasant continued to help transport slaves to freedom. Throughout her life, she would continue her strong support of equal rights. Then, in 1848, she started a relationship with a black man named John James Pleasant. It's speculated that this was her second husband, as she took his last name, although there's no official records of the marriage taking place. Together, they followed Smith's instructions, but after a few years, they were forced to move to New Orleans due to rising suspicion from slavers. It was around this time that the California Gold Rush began. In 1850, California joined the Union as a free, non-slavery state, and word soon spread about the potential fortunes to be made there, no matter your race or background. Owing to this, in April 1852, Pleasant decided to leave New Orleans and made her way to San Francisco. As a light-skinned black woman, she passed as white and made sure to use her first husband's surname when interacting with whites to reduce potential discrimination. She soon found a job as a cook and domestic servant for wealthy businessmen. These were some of the city's most important men, and she worked for them for a specific reason. To these men, she was invisible, and it was this dismissive attitude that she made the most of. Pleasant used her proximity to shrewdly eavesdrop on the wealthy people she served. By doing so, she picked up investment tips and juicy gossip. The biographer Lynn Hudson, in an interview about Pleasant, stated, "It's quite possible that the jobs she had as a domestic were a cover that she was using because she clearly made her money from investments." As a cook in San Francisco, Pleasant reportedly earned around $500 a month. With this money, as well as the inheritance from her first husband, she invested in real estate, gold, and silver mines. She eventually made enough money to start her own laundry business, and from there she expanded. In San Francisco, Pleasant continued to help former slaves with financial aid and by finding employment for them. As she became more successful, she brought many into her service and gave them important positions. Within wealthy white circles, she was seen as a business owner, and to many, she was seen as one of their own. Yet, only the black community knew her real identity. She was known as the Black City Hall, who brought the Underground Railroad to the West. Some of those she aided would later become important black leaders in the city. In 1857, she left San Francisco to aid the abolitionist John Brown. She actively supported his cause, sending him a total of around $30,000. With this money, he was able to finance his raid on the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry in Virginia. Brown had hoped that this would provoke a larger armed slave revolt in the South, but his plan failed. In 1859, Pleasant returned to San Francisco, where she continued to run her businesses and support civil rights movements. On the 2nd of December of the same year, John Brown was hung for murder and treason. After the hanging, they found a note in his pocket which read, "The axe is laid at the foot of the tree. When the first blow is struck, there will be more money to help." The note was signed by M.E.P. for Mary Ellen Pleasant, yet officials misread the letters and were on the lookout for someone with the initials W.E.P. They had no idea who wrote the note, but were presumably after a wealthy northerner. Pleasant was never suspected, and we only know it was her as she revealed this before her death. By the 1860s, Pleasant owned boarding houses and a chain of thriving laundry businesses. Despite her success, she remained humble. On many occasions, she would disguise herself as a servant so she could be overlooked. She then met a young bank clerk called Thomas Bell. Together, they formed a decades-long business partnership which would make both parties extremely wealthy. The Scotsman was already making decent money by trading in mercury, more commonly known as quicksilver, but when he met Pleasant, he realized just how successful he could become by her side. In 1865, following the end of the Civil War, Pleasant went to the city directory and publicly changed her racial designation from white to black. She did this to stand up for racial tensions that existed in the country, despite this making life more difficult for herself. In one of her memoirs, she wrote that her cause was the freedom and equality for myself and for my people, and I'd rather be a corpse than a coward. Pleasant's personal relationship with Bell is uncertain. It's possible that it was romantic for a time, but sources differ. In any case, they began to invest in a variety of businesses, with Pleasant leading the way. For the most part, Bell simply followed her advice and guidance. As Pleasant had now registered as black, she was afraid that people would start to question how she made all this money. In order to avoid potential problems and discrimination, she put investments and properties in Bell's name. This facilitated business dealings, which may have been more difficult for a woman during the 1860s, especially for a black woman. Pleasant publicly attacked racial discrimination occurring in San Francisco and continued to look out for civil rights. In 1866, while on a city streetcar, her and two other black women were forcibly removed. Because of this, she filed lawsuits against two streetcar companies for racial discrimination. One of the companies promised to allow African Americans to board their streetcars, while the other didn't back down. The case, Pleasant versus North Beach and Mission Railroad Company, made its way to the state Supreme Court. In the end, Pleasant paved the way for the desegregation of the city's streetcars. Thanks to these efforts, years later, she was recognized as the mother of civil rights in California. As the years went on, Pleasant and Bell's fortune continued to grow. They soon had shares in laundries, dairies, restaurants, boarding houses, and even Wells Fargo Bank. By 1875, they had amassed a huge fortune, estimated at over $30 million. To put that into perspective, it's equivalent to around $850 million today. In 1877, Pleasant's former partner, John James, who had worked on the Underground Railroad with her, died of diabetes. It's unsure what type of relationship they had after her alliance with Thomas Bell. With her vast wealth, Pleasant built a 30-room Victorian-styled mansion in the heart of San Francisco. The house had large grounds and was of course lavishly furnished. At the time, it was worth around $100,000, equivalent to $2.4 million today. Pleasant lived in the mansion along with Bell and his family, as well as staff. She also bought various other properties, such as a huge 1,000-acre ranch in the Sonoma Valley, northeast of San Francisco. But by the 1880s, things were changing in San Francisco. The city that had allowed her to create a fortune was becoming a much more overtly racist city. Because of her wealth, many grew jealous. Local whites became hostile and started to shun her, stating that she was Bell's mistress and nothing more. Furthermore, rumors started to spread that her boarding houses were actually brothels, and that she had some otherworldly hold over the wealthy white people she was close to. Then, in 1883, Pleasant became entangled in the scandalous trial of the Nevada Senator William Sharon. He was accused of seducing and then abandoning a young woman called Sarah Hill. This trial was reported everywhere, every day, and it wasn't long until the whole nation was following the events. The senator's lawyers claimed that Pleasant, who was Sarah Hill's friend, had used dark forces to manipulate her into entrapping the senator. Despite this being absurd, Pleasant went along with it and brought a voodoo doll to court. She claimed that she would use her powers to cause his death. The crazy thing is that soon after she stated this, still in the trial, the senator died. This confirmed many suspicions, and she was soon seen as an evil, mythical figure. Many thought of her as a voodoo queen. It was also around this time that they began to call her the racist nickname Mammy Pleasant, because of the years she spent as a domestic servant. The press also called her by this name, but she didn't like this. She said, "I don't like to be called Mammy by everybody. Put that down. I am not Mammy to everybody in California. I received a letter from a pastor in Sacramento. It was addressed to Mammy Pleasant. I wrote back to him on his own paper that my name was Mrs. Mary E. Pleasant. I wouldn't waste any of my paper on him." In 1899, Thomas Bell passed away. This had far-ranging repercussions for Pleasant. When he was found dead in Pleasant's mansion, his widow, Teresa Bell, on a full-page smear campaign in the San Francisco Chronicle with the headline, "The Queen of the Voodoos." The press portrayed her as a monster, accusing her of witchcraft, implying that she had murdered Bell. Teresa Bell and her son Fred Bell then sued Pleasant for control of the shared multi-million-dollar fortune. A series of court battles followed, but things weren't looking very positive for Pleasant. Firstly, her reputation had been tarnished by newspaper allegations regarding her brothels, voodoo practices, and some rumors even said that she ate and stole babies. Furthermore, lots of her properties, including the mansion she designed and built, were held in Bell's name. This made it very difficult for her to prove ownership. To further harm her reputation, lies were told of her. In one case, it states that she kept the feeble near senile Bell, a prisoner in his mansion at the corner of Octavia and Bush, and that she fed his children dog meat and stale bread. In spite of these difficulties, Pleasant made a strong case that the mansion was indeed hers. Well, she showed the court evidence proving she had designed and paid for its construction. However, in the end she lost the legal battle, along with her reputation, and most of her fortune. Shortly after this, she was evicted from her San Francisco mansion, and she soon plunged into poverty. With her wealth depleted, she depended on the kindness of friends to put a roof over her head. By the end of her life, she was a famous figure in San Francisco, even though she was seen as a demon to some. Mary Ellen Pleasant died in 1904 at the age of 89. Despite all that she managed to accomplish during her life, she isn't as well remembered as she ought to be. This is mainly down to her activities being secretive or quite controversial. Furthermore, her life is surrounded in mystery due to a lack of evidence. For example, she wrote 3 autobiographies, but each one has contradictions. On her deathbed, she asked for her gravestone to state, "A friend of John Brown." This was added 60 years after her passing. In San Francisco, there's a day dedicated to Mary Ellen Pleasant, and a park named after her near to where her home once stood. The park is the smallest in the city, and her ghost is said to haunt it and throw eucalyptus nuts at people who pass by at night. Thank you everyone for watching this video on Mary Ellen Pleasant. If you enjoyed, please leave me a like and a comment. If you're new, why not subscribe? This was recommended to me via email, so if you have any suggestions, please leave me a comment or an email, which it's easier for me to see. Anyway, I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Lives. Thanks!